Welcome back. Let's talk to Mr. Samson Itodo. He's the Executive Director of Yaga Africa, joining us from our Abuja studios. Mr. Itodo, thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone.
I know that you're big on election management and electoral integrity, which is the fulcrum of our conversation today. But as a first question, we've asked questions around why these politicians are defecting left, right, and center. I think they've all agreed to a large extent. I've even heard governors say that, and even challenging anybody who has a different position to the fact that the parties don't have ideologies. So what's the difference between APC, PDP, and Labour Party in that sense? So they keep saying these things. But some have said that the reason for the movement, beside the internal wrangling of the opposition not being steady, is also the allegations to the effect that the election is the opposition versus INEC. That's the way people put it. More like it's either you align with the ruling party or INEC will do, you know, some of the things people say. What do you make when you hear such things and juxtapose it with what you're working on as far as electoral integrity is concerned?
Well, thanks. First, let me preface my response by commending both of you. I listened to your initial remarks when you started this program about how the media should hold, political leaders to account in the absence of strong opposition. I was quite inspired to hear both of you and the way you sound. Please continue on that trajectory, because that's what gives hope, what gives life to democracy. To your question, you see, all the political structures and platforms that we have in the country today suffer from similar deficiencies. The first is elite capture. The second is patronage-based structures within the parties. And then lastly is just the lack of regard for democratic ethos and principles. All the political parties that, we have. So when you see an institution like INEC under intense pressure, it is under pressure because you have a weak political party system where political parties lack ideology, they lack regards for the principles of internal democracy within parties. Political parties exist as an aggregation of social interest, not just presenting candidates for power. But what you see is just special purpose vehicles. And our parties have not emerged, as strong political institutions that drive, democracy. So when you look at this vis-a-vis the Electoral Commission, there has been questions as to who should have the power to register political parties. Do we need this number of political parties, or what we should do is regulate access, to the ballot? Because at the heart of this is the fundamental constitutional right of association, which cannot be infringed upon. So you need to recognize that right. But should we have all the parties, on the ballot is a big question that we should ask. And our disposition have always been that, yes, you may not regulate the number of political parties, but you can regulate the number of parties who should be on the ballot. So impose conditions for access, to the ballot. The second point is who has the power to regulate political parties, especially when you have a political class that has no regards, even for their own internal rules, their own constitution, talk more of having regards for the Constitution and our Electoral Act. And so who should regulate those parties? INEC exists as a regulatory agency. And so when you look at improvements that have been made in the Electoral Act to the effect that when a party is convening a meeting for the purposes of either electing its leaders or electing candidates or for the purposes of merger, INEC needs to be present to monitor those meetings. But if you look at the level of compliance, that has also been a big question. And so we have said consistently that INEC is overburdened with this responsibility of regulating political parties. And in line with Justice Uwe's committee's recommendation, that there is a great need to set up a different institution to manage the registration and the regulation of parties. But I dare say that I don't think that we should have over 150 political parties on the ballot. We can have more parties, but regulate access, to the ballot because of the right that people have for association.
Mr. Itodo, we're going to come to that great work you've done on electoral integrity in just a moment, but you've spoken about internal democracy. And I just went to the APC's page where they informed Nigerians about the resignation of Abdullahi Umar Ganduje as the chairman of the party. I'm going to read what under it is the statement by Felix Moka. Just above it, directing people to read the main statement, it says, the president has directed the deputy national chairman North, Honorable Ali Bukr Dolari, to assume the position of acting national chairman. When I see things like this, for me, who try to be a law enthusiast, it's very confusing, because if the party has a constitution, I don't know what their party says, the law, I'll check it out. The party is supposed to be clear on when things like this happen. Would they have waited for the direction of the president? Is it not natural that somebody from that area? I want you to speak to the issue of upholding the laws that they have all sworn to abide by as to discretional directions.
Thank you very much. There lies the problem. There lies the problem. When you think about internal democracy within parties, what do we mean? We simply mean that in a political party, how are leaders of a political party elected? Are they elected via a democratic and transparent process? 2, how are decisions being made within the political party? Do they meet the test of inclusivity, transparency, and accountability? Or is just one individual or a set of individuals that take decisions for the party and lord it over the other members of the party? The third domain is in the election or selection of candidates. And to what extent can we say that process is democratic and transparent? In this particular instance, this is a clear manifestation of the weak state of our political parties. Because how can the president direct? The party should have, and this is the whole problem within our party system across board, that we build parties around individuals. And so individuals are ascribed as leaders of a party, even when they are not elected as officials of the party. In an ideal case, what you expect is that the constitution of the party is clear as to what happens in the event an officer of the party resigns. You kickstart, you activate the process, and you don't need any directives from anyone, regardless of the position that they hold. So there lies a manifestation of the weak state of our political parties, and that our parties are subservient, to the dictates of individuals and the parties. And it's not just the APC. You talked about the NNPP this morning, and you saw the response, from the individual who represented the party. It's the same thing with the PDP. It's the same thing with Labour Party. Until we stop building political parties around individuals, but around a common ideology, around collective and shared values that puts people at the center, that members of the parties have a say in the way their party is governed, you continue to have special purpose vehicles that simply exist to advance interests of individuals as opposed to the collective interest of members, of those who subscribe, to the membership of those parties.
So wherein lies the hope now? Are you hopeful seeing the 110 organizations that are seeking registration of political parties? Key of Freedom Party, Absolute Congress, all grassroots party. I'm just picking some of the, the names on that list. You see this one, About Nigeria Party, that will be called ABNP. Zuma Reform. Do you see any hope in some of these organizations seeking to register political parties? Do they offer hope to you? And how do we really separate the contenders from the pretenders in this sense?
So from a rights perspective, a human rights perspective, and as Yaiga Africa, we exist to defend human rights. The Constitution is very clear that the freedom of association, the freedom of expression shall be guaranteed in this geographical enclave that we call Nigeria, because we are a constitutional democracy. And to that effect, I respect the choices of people who choose to congregate in an association seeking to be recognized as a political party. They have a right to do so. So that is established. The other layer to this is, and your question is, do I have hope? I have hope to the extent that these political associations, if registered, will uphold the tenets of democracy. And what do I mean? That one, that they are not proxies for certain other political or established political parties. In other words, that they are not proxies for the big political parties. That secondly, that they don't perpetuate the same ugly practices that we see within the existing political structures. And thirdly, that they bring an alternative, to the table. And if they don't, then honestly, I do not have any hope, because these groups will constitute the same problems that we have. There is no point having a long ballot paper confusing voters when all of these political associations are nothing but mushroom political parties. It doesn't make any sense. In fact, it comes to the country at a cost, because the amount of money that we would expend on printing a ballot paper would increase because of the number of logos that you need to have within our ballot paper. So I have hope if all of these conditions are met. But if they are not, then I think this will become a dark side of our electoral process. But people do have a right, to associate, and INEC is bound by the Constitution to protect the rights of these individuals if they meet the set criteria. And if they don't meet the criteria, then there is no point actually spending time on this, because it will be nothing but a mere distraction, preventing the Electoral Commission from conducting other activities as it prepares to the 2027 elections. That is just 599 days from today.
So we really hope that these proposals offer some hope. You see, Free Will Humanitarian Party, above all. That's it, just above all. There's this Reset Nigeria, RN, and the list goes on, as we've been trying to put them up from time to time on the screen. 110 of them. So while all of this is happening, Mr. Itodo, there's also the real work that needs to be done, and that's where the rubber meets the road, as they say, and it concerns election integrity. You've been doing some work. In fact, you're counting down, literally, to the next election. And at this point, you have some findings about the integrity of Nigeria's 2027 general election at risk. Maybe speak to us about that.
So, thanks, Coyote. So this is midterm to the 2027 elections. It's midterm between the 2023 and the 2027 elections. And like I mentioned earlier, that today makes it 599 days to the 2023 elections. By February next year, INEC is expected to issue the timetable for the elections. And with that, we start preparing for the primaries that will start in April next year. So plus or minus, we are less than 7 months to the commencement of primaries for the 2027 elections. And that explains the flurry of political activities within the polity. So last week we issued our second report. This is the second report on the state of electoral integrity since the 2023 elections. And what are our conclusions and findings? The first one is that the 2027 elections might be the most compromised and the most monetized election in Nigeria's history since return to democracy in 1999. And we've advanced reasons for that. The first is the level of trust in the Electoral Commission and in the electoral process that is at its lowest ebb, that successive elections since 2023 have done nothing but dampen and broken the trust that citizens have in the electoral process. The second point that we also raised was that the political process is being primed in a way that it eliminates any form of political competition. And that is troubling and disturbing for our electoral process. The third was that the level of vote buying and vote selling in the 2027 elections might hit a record high in the next election because of the economic hardship that Nigerians face as at today. And that's why we have concluded that the 2027 election risks being the most compromised and the most monetized election if nothing is done to prevent and mitigate this risk. And we've advanced, actions that can be taken. First of all, is the National Assembly needs to conclude on the amendments to the electoral process, because there are ongoing reforms process, and the National Assembly needs to conclude on the amendments to the Electoral Act and the Constitution. This week, there will be several public hearings across different geopolitical zones on the Constitution review. But as you see, the National Assembly will proceed on recess at the end of July. And the question is, will we have an Electoral Act way before the next election in November? We don't know. The second point is the scrutiny that is required for appointments into INEC. The current INEC chairman would leave office at the first week of December. The key question is, who will be the next chairman of INEC? Who will be the next commissioners of INEC? And we've called on citizens to be actively involved in providing oversight on who gets appointed, because the process of rebuilding trust in the electoral process begins with the appointment of individuals who have the moral integrity, the moral capital, the competence, and then those who do not have any political leanings. Previous appointments to INEC have raised concerns about the non-partisanship of those individuals. And if you appoint an INEC chairman that is politically aligned, it will break, the trust that citizens have in the process. This is why the president needs to act as a statesman at this particular point. If he cares about political or democratic legitimacy, he needs to ensure that whoever succeeds Professor Mahmoud is one that does not have any political leanings, is one that has integrity, and is one that has the competence, because we would have a short time for the next chairman of INEC to settle ahead of the 2027 elections.
Samson Itodo, as always, thank you so much for the work you do with Young Africa. We'll continue to touch base, and we hope that some of the things that your organization and several others have been at the vanguard of, the authorities will hit to them, and so that we can have a better election system or electoral system going forward. Thank you so much. Samson Itodo is the Executive Director of Young Africa. Thank you for joining us on the program.